The day had started like any other inside that grand event hall. Workers walked quickly from one end to the other, carrying trays, decorations, and documents. Everyone was preparing for an important business gathering that evening. Soft music played from the speakers, but it was almost hidden beneath the sound of footsteps and the clinking of glasses being arranged on tables. In the middle of all this movement was a housekeeper, quietly doing her job. She moved with calm steps, wiping down tables, fixing chairs, and making sure every corner looked perfect. She didn't speak much, and most people barely noticed her as they walked past. To many, she was just part of the background, someone who kept things clean but didn't matter to the world of meetings, money, and business deals. But today, someone did notice her, the owner of the hall himself. He arrived wearing an expensive suit, walking confidently with a look that always made everyone stand straighter. He was a man who loved power, loved attention, and loved being the smartest person in any room. He was known for treating his workers politely in front of guests, but speaking sharply to them when no one was watching. As he walked into the hall, he spotted the housekeeper by the stage. She was wiping fingerprints off the edge of the grand piano that stood there. It was an enormous, shiny instrument, the kind of piano only wealthy people kept. It reflected the lights above and made the whole stage look more luxurious. The housekeeper wasn't touching the keys. She would never dare. She was just cleaning it carefully like she did every day. But something in her eyes betrayed her. There was a small pause, just a second, when she looked at the keys with a softness that didn't match her uniform. It was the kind of look someone gives to something they once loved. The businessman noticed that look. He smirked immediately, amused. To him, the idea that a housekeeper might have any connection to such an elegant instrument felt ridiculous, and he never failed to make a joke when something entertained him. He walked closer, his shoes clicking sharply on the floor. "You're staring at that piano like you want to play it," he said loudly enough for a few workers nearby to hear. The housekeeper froze. She looked down, embarrassed, and shook her head. "I was just cleaning, sir." But he wasn't done. His smirk grew wider. "Come on," he said in a teasing tone. "Play it if you dare." Some of the staff turned their heads. They weren't sure if he was joking or trying to irritate her. The housekeeper swallowed hard. She didn't want attention. She only wanted to finish her work and stay invisible, the way she always did. She tried to step away, but he blocked her path with one hand. "Don't be shy," he said. "Let's see what you can do." It sounded like a friendly challenge, but everyone knew the truth. He was mocking her. He expected her to sit down, tap a few wrong notes, and then laugh along with him. Maybe he thought it would entertain his guests later. Maybe he thought it would remind everyone of his power, that he could make anyone do anything with just his words. The housekeeper looked round. All eyes were on her. She didn't know what to do. She had not played the piano in years. Life had pushed her far away from music. Her responsibilities had grown heavier, and her dreams had faded with time. But something inside her, buried deep, still remembered what it felt like to touch the keys. She glanced at the piano once more. It had been so long. The thought of playing in front of strangers made her heart race, but the thought of being laughed at made her stomach twist even more. "I really shouldn't," she began softly. The businessman cut her off. "Scared?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. That one word hit her like a spark, not because she felt insulted, but because she remembered someone long ago who used to encourage her whenever she looked afraid. She remembered soft hands guiding hers across the keys when she was young. She remembered laughter, warm voices, and moments that felt safe. Something changed inside her at that moment. She lifted her eyes slowly. She didn't look angry. She didn't look confident either. She simply looked tired of hiding parts of herself that no one had ever asked about. "If you want me to play," she said quietly, "I will." The businessman blinked, surprised. He had not expected her to agree. A few staff members exchanged glances. No one knew what was about to happen, but everyone felt something unusual in the air. The housekeeper stepped toward the piano. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the bench out. She sat down carefully, as if the instrument might break under her. The hall suddenly felt too quiet. Even the workers who were still busy slowed down. Sneaking curious looks at her, she placed her hands on her lap for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. Her heart was pounding loudly in her chest. She knew she couldn't just press random keys. She knew she couldn't afford to embarrass herself, not in front of so many eyes, and not in front of a man who would never let her forget it. She slowly lifted her hands and hovered them above the keys. The smooth surface felt cold at first, like something distant from her life now, but as her fingertips rested gently on the ivory, a wave of memories washed over her. The hall disappeared for a second. She wasn't sitting on a stage anymore. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wasn't being watched. She was a young girl again, sitting beside someone she loved, learning the simplest melody she had ever known, a melody that wasn't fancy, wasn't difficult, but meant everything to her heart. Her breath shook softly. She whispered something only she could hear, a small line she used to repeat before playing. Just feel it. Don't fear it. The businessman crossed his arms, impatient. Any time today, he said. She didn't respond. She didn't look at him. She simply closed her eyes. And then, with a gentle, trembling touch, she pressed the first note. It rang out clear and soft through the hall. Everyone stopped. Workers froze with trays in hand. A decorator paused mid-tie with a string of lights. The businessman lifted his head slightly, the teasing smirk slipping from his face as he heard the unexpected clarity in the sound. The housekeeper didn't rush. Her fingers moved slowly at first, feeling the weight of each key, letting the sound sink into the room. She played a pattern her hands remembered even if her mind had forgotten the details. The notes blended into a melody simple, soft, emotional. It wasn't the kind of music that showed off skill. It wasn't loud, powerful, or dramatic. It was tender, gentle, and full of a quiet sadness that felt too real to ignore. The melody carried a story, not one told through words, but through emotions that she had kept hidden for years. The businessman leaned forward slightly. He didn't say anything now. The smirk was gone. A small crease formed on his forehead as he tried to understand what he was hearing. The workers looked at each other silently. None of them had expected this. No one had thought the housekeeper, the quiet woman who spent her days mopping floors and wiping tables, could make a piano speak like this. Her hands moved more freely now. She wasn't thinking about the crowd anymore. She wasn't thinking about the challenge. She wasn't even thinking about the businessman who had mocked her. She was thinking about the past, about the person who had taught her everything she knew, about the last time she had played this very melody before life became too hard, too busy, too heavy. Her fingers danced lightly across the keys, not perfectly, but beautifully. There was a small shake in her hands now and then, but the emotion behind every note made the melody feel alive. The hall seemed to hold its breath. By the time she reached the middle of the tune, something unspoken had filled the air, something warm and heartbreaking at the same time. A few workers felt a sudden sting in their eyes. Someone in the back swallowed hard. The music wasn't loud, but it reached everyone in the room. The businessman wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes followed her hands, confused yet drawn in. He looked like a man who had lost the ability to interrupt, for the first time in a long time. And then, just as the melody began to climb gently, just as she reached the part she feared most, she took a deep breath and let her fingers fall into the final notes. Her hands hovered above the keys when she was done. The last sound lingered, soft and fragile, before fading into silence. The hall stayed quiet. No one clapped. No one spoke. It wasn't because they didn't want to. It was because they couldn't quite process what they had seen. A housekeeper had just played a melody that felt like it came from a different world. She slowly opened her eyes. The businessman stared at her with a stunned expression, the kind of look someone has when they're forced to confront something they never believed possible. She stood up quietly, brushed her uniform gently, and whispered, "I should get back to work." But nothing in that hall would ever be the same after this moment. The hall stayed strangely silent long after the last note faded. People stood completely still, as if their minds were still trying to understand what they had heard. A few workers looked at each other, whispering without words. Something had shifted in that moment, something none of them could fully explain. The housekeeper stepped away from the piano slowly. She wasn't smiling, and she wasn't proud. She looked almost scared. Scared that she had shown too much of herself in front of people who barely knew her. She walked back toward her cleaning cart, trying to blend into the background again, hoping the spotlight would disappear. But it didn't. The businessman remained standing in the same place, still staring at the piano, his arms lowered, his expression confused. He had expected a joke, maybe a mistake or two he could laugh at. He had never expected a melody filled with emotion. Something in that tune had reached him in a way he didn't know how to describe. Finally, one of the workers broke the silence with a soft breath. "Sir, did you know she could play like that?" The businessman snapped out of his thoughts. He shook his head, still dazed. "No, I didn't." The worker nodded slowly. "It was beautiful, beautiful." That wasn't a word the businessman used often. He usually spoke with numbers, deals, profits, and achievements. Beauty wasn't part of his daily world. But as he replayed the melody in his mind, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A strange heaviness in his chest, and a quiet ache he hadn't faced in years. He looked toward the housekeeper again. She was wiping a window now, her head lowered, moving quietly as if nothing had happened. But her hands were trembling slightly, and that small detail didn't escape his eyes. He hesitated for a moment before walking toward her. Each step felt heavier than usual. He wasn't used to feeling unsure, but something about her calmness made him feel small, almost childish. He stopped beside her, clearing his throat. "You didn't tell me you could play," he said. She paused, then looked at him briefly before lowering her eyes again. "It wasn't important," she replied softly. He frowned. "Not important? You played like a professional?" She shook her head gently. "Not anymore." There was something in her voice, something tired, something full of an old pain he didn't understand. For the first time, the businessman saw her not as an employee but as a person. Someone with a past, someone with emotions, someone who carried stories that didn't fit into a uniform. Before he could ask another question, the sound of footsteps echoed from the opposite side of the hall. It was a group of early arriving guests, investors, partners, and business friends who had come to inspect the preparations. The businessman straightened immediately, putting on his confident expression again. But even as he walked away to greet them, his eyes drifted toward the piano again. The housekeeper's melody was still playing in his head like an unfinished sentence. The guests spread around the hall, checking decorations, lights, and arrangements. A few of them walked near the stage and stopped at the piano. One of them ran a finger across the keys and laughed casually. "Looks expensive," he said. Another nodded. "Yeah, too bad it's just here for show. Nobody here knows how to play." The housekeeper heard the comment from across the room. She froze for a second, her heart tightened, but she stayed silent, continuing her work. The businessman, however, overheard it too, and something inside him twisted at that remark. He looked around slowly until his eyes found her again. She was trying hard to pretend she didn't hear anything. He unexpectedly felt protective, a feeling that surprised even him. The guests continued their conversations, unaware of the shift in the room's atmosphere. Some joked loudly, others bragged about business deals. Meanwhile, workers hurried to finish last-minute tasks, but the businessman wasn't focused on the event anymore. His mind was stuck on the melody she had played. It wasn't complicated, but it was unforgettable. Every note had felt personal, almost like she was telling a story through her fingertips. Finally, after several minutes of inner conflict, he excused himself from the group and walked back to her. This time, he spoke more quietly, almost respectfully. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. The housekeeper stopped wiping a chair. She looked at him with surprise. No one had asked her that question in years. She hesitated before answering. "My mother taught me," she said. "When I was young, she played every night. I learned sitting beside her." His eyes softened slightly. "She must have been good." A faint smile touched her lips for the first time. To me, she was the best." He wanted to ask more, but one of the guests called his name from across the hall. Duty pulled him away again. He turned reluctantly, giving her a small nod before walking back. As the evening approached, the hall grew louder. Guests started arriving in groups. The hall staff moved quickly, serving refreshments and making sure everything looked perfect. The business event officially began, and people filled the room with laughter, handshakes, and discussions. But the businessman, he wasn't really paying attention. His eyes drifted toward the piano every few minutes, and every time he saw it, he remembered the housekeeper's trembling hands, the softness in her expression, the emotion in her tune. He knew one thing clearly now: what he did earlier wasn't right. Challenging her like a child, treating her talent like a joke. It felt wrong, and the guilt started to crawl inside him slowly. He waited until there was a small break in the event. Guests had gathered around the buffet and the room was filled with light chatter. Seizing the moment, he looked toward the housekeeper. She was standing near a corner, quietly organizing cleaning supplies. He walked up to her again. This time, he didn't smirk or tease. His tone had changed completely. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. The housekeeper looked startled. She wasn't expecting that. She shook her head immediately. "You don't need to, I do," he insisted. "I didn't mean to embarrass you." She paused, not knowing how to respond. He continued before she could speak. "I shouldn't have challenged you like that." I thought. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I thought you didn't know anything about music. I was wrong." She took a slow breath. "It's all right. People usually assume things," he sighed. "Still, I'm sorry." For a few moments, they stood there in silence. Workers passed by, busy with trays. Guests laughed across the hall. But in that small corner, an unexpected moment of honesty took place between two people who usually lived in separate worlds. "You're very talented," he said quietly. "That melody, it wasn't ordinary." Her eyes softened. It was a memory, she said simply. A memory, he asked. She nodded. It's a tune my mother made. I haven't played it in years. I only play it when I miss her. The businessman felt a tug inside his chest. He wasn't used to feeling emotional about other people's stories, but something about her sincerity felt heavy that there was another silence. Then, out of curiosity, he asked gently, "Why did you stop playing? If you were this good, you could have been a musician." Her smile faded a little. "Life doesn't always take you where you want to go," she said. "Sometimes you have to choose work over passion. Sometimes responsibilities come before dreams." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He looked away for a second, thinking about his own life, how he had chased success endlessly, how he had lost touch with the things that once made him happy, how he had forgotten what passion even felt like, before he could say anything more. Someone announced that the next presentation was starting. The businessman had to return to the stage, but he walked back with a different expression now. His mind wasn't on business anymore. It was still on her melody, her story, her calm acceptance of life. The event continued, but it didn't feel the same. People gave speeches, shook hands, and exchanged business cards, but the businessman remained distracted, replaying the tune over and over in his mind like a waterfall he couldn't stop hearing. Later in the night, after most guests had left, he found her again putting away chairs. He walked over with a deep breath, knowing he had one more thing he needed to say, something he had been thinking about since her performance. "Listen," he said softly. "I think the world needs to hear you play again." She looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" He glanced toward the piano. "I'm opening a new venue next month. A small stage, live music, people who love art. I want you to perform there." Her face froze. She shook her head instantly. "I can't. I'm not a performer. I just clean here." "I'm not." "You are," he interrupted firmly. "You just don't see it yet." She looked away, trying to calm her breathing. The idea terrified her, playing for an entire audience, letting strangers hear her deepest feelings. It felt overwhelming. She touched the edge of a chair to steady herself. "I don't think I can," she said weakly. The businessman stepped back, giving her space. "You don't have to decide now," he said gently. "Just think about it." She didn't answer. She kept her eyes low, her heart beating too fast, unsure of what she wanted. But one thing was certain, the melody she played earlier had changed something. Not just in him, not just in the staff, it had changed her too. It had woken up a part of her she thought was gone forever, and this was only the beginning. The next morning arrived, but the mood inside the house was nothing like the day before. The businessman woke up earlier than usual. He tried to act normal, but something inside him felt unsettled. He kept remembering the sound of the piano from the previous night. He kept remembering how confidently the housekeeper played, how steady her hands were, and how deeply the melody touched something in him. He walked into the living room with a cup of tea in his hand, but instead of relaxing, he found himself staring at the piano again. The same piano he had mocked her about, the same piano she had turned into something magical. He stood there for a long moment, quiet and thoughtful. He didn't want to admit it, but he was bothered by the idea that someone he underestimated so easily had a skill far beyond what he expected. He thought maybe he was overthinking. Maybe he misjudged the moment. Maybe it wasn't as powerful as it felt. But even as he tried to convince himself, the notes still played in his mind as clear as real sound. He stepped away and tried to get busy with work. His laptop sat open on the big dining table. Emails lined the screen. Meetings waited for his replies. But he couldn't focus. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, but his brain wasn't in the room. Every few seconds, his eyes wandered toward the living room, to the piano, to the memory of the housekeeper sitting calmly while he watched in shock. He finally closed the laptop with a sigh. His usual confidence felt shaken. He walked around the house for a bit, pacing from room to room. The housekeeper wasn't there yet. She was always on time, never early. He kept checking the clock without even noticing he was doing it. When she finally arrived, she entered quietly the way she always did. She carried her cleaning basket, tied her hair back, and started her routine without making any noise. The businessman saw her but didn't speak. He wanted to say something, but pride blocked his words. He wasn't used to feeling like this, embarrassed, slightly curious, and oddly impressed, all at the same time. He tried to ignore her and sit back at his work, but the silence between them felt too heavy. The housekeeper sensed something different, but she didn't ask. She kept her head down and continued wiping counters, dusting shelves, and organizing little details around the house. She always respected his space and never bothered him. Eventually, he cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "About yesterday," he started, but the sentence didn't know where to go. She paused at the shelf she was dusting, turning slightly but not fully facing him. She kept her expression calm. "Yes, sir," she asked politely. He hesitated. He looked at the piano again. The awkwardness in him grew stronger. "You played well," he finally managed to say. His voice was low, almost stiff. She nodded once, a small smile appearing but not fully forming. "Thank you," she said. "I just played something I learned a long time ago." But the businessman didn't feel done. There were other things he wanted to say, questions he wanted to ask, thoughts he couldn't quite organize. He didn't know how to express what he felt. He didn't want to seem too affected or too impressed. That wasn't his usual style. He ended the conversation abruptly and returned to his work, leaving her to continue cleaning. But throughout the day he kept watching her indirectly, how calmly she moved around the house, how nothing about her changed even after showing such talent. She wasn't looking for praise or power. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply doing her job the same way she always did. Later that afternoon, he walked into the living room again. She was dusting near the piano. He paused and took a deep breath. Something pushed him forward, maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe some kind of respect he didn't want to admit yet. "What was that song?" he asked suddenly. She looked up, surprised. "Just something I composed myself," she said quietly. "I used to write small pieces for fun." He blinked. "You composed it?" "Yes," she replied. Many years ago, the businessman felt another wave of surprise rise inside him. That made it even more impressive. Not only did she play well, she created the tune. He leaned against the wall, slightly unsettled by this new information. "Why did you stop?" he asked. She took a little pause. Her eyes lowered for a moment before she answered. "Life changed," she said softly. "My family needed support, so I took whatever work I could. Music became something I kept to myself." Her tone was simple, but the meaning hit him harder than he expected. He didn't know what to say. He had spent years building his business, chasing success, chasing achievements, and he had always believed that talent finds its way to the top. But now he saw someone with real, powerful talent who had been forced to hide it because life didn't give her the same chances. He cleared his throat again, trying to steady himself. "You must have been really good," he said. But she smiled gently and shook her head. "I don't know about that. I just loved playing." The businessman felt a strange mix of guilt and admiration. He had mocked her, doubted her, looked down on her, and yet, she had given him a performance he would never forget. The more he thought about it, the more he felt the need to make things right somehow. But he wasn't sure how to do that without sounding awkward or disrespectful. He wasn't used to apologizing or showing softness. Later that evening, when she was about to leave, he spoke again. "If you ever want to play again, you can," he said, trying not to sound too emotional. "I mean, the piano is here. You don't need permission." She nodded slowly, understanding the attempt he was making. "Thank you," she said with a polite smile. "But I only played yesterday because you challenged me." Her casual answer made him feel another sting of guilt. He remembered the moment clearly, the smirk on his face, the mocking tone, the careless remark. He wasn't proud of it now. He didn't have to take the challenge so seriously. He tried to joke, but she replied calmly, "Sometimes people think others cannot do something. Sometimes it's important to remind them they might be wrong." Her words were soft, not angry, but they carried something strong, something honest. He let out a slow breath. He didn't argue. He couldn't. When she left the house that day, he sat on the sofa staring at the piano again. The room felt strangely different, as if something inside him was shifting, urging him to look beyond the surface of people. That night, he replayed the entire incident in his mind. The way she walked to the piano without fear, the way her fingers moved so naturally, the way the melody filled the room with a calmness he had not felt in years. He kept thinking about the fact that such a talent had been hidden inside someone he had hardly ever spoken to. The businessman was not the type to be emotional, but he felt something that almost resembled regret, not only for how he treated her, but for how he had been living, judging people too quickly, assuming things without understanding anything about their stories. The next day, something unexpected happened. He woke up with a strange thought. What if he actually tried learning something from her? What if he tried playing a few notes just to understand what made her tune so meaningful? The idea felt embarrassing at first, but it didn't go away. When she arrived, he didn't waste time. He approached her while she was sweeping the living room floor. "Could you maybe show me a few things on the piano?" he asked awkwardly. She froze, surprised. She looked at him, trying to see if he was joking or serious. "I mean," he continued quickly, "just something simple. I keep thinking about that tune, and I just want to understand how you played it." Her expression softened. She nodded slowly. "If you want to learn, I can show you," she said. That small moment, just a simple exchange, became the beginning of something that would soon change both of them in unexpected ways. The house felt different from the moment the businessman asked her to teach him something on the piano. It wasn't a grand request, but it carried a weight that both of them quietly understood. For him, it meant stepping out of his pride. For her, it meant stepping back into a world she once loved but had left behind. That afternoon, when she finished cleaning the living room, she wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the piano. She paused for a moment, gently touching the top of it, as if greeting an old friend after many years. The businessman stood nearby, nervous but pretending he wasn't. He crossed his arms and tried to look calm, but his posture betrayed his uneasiness. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's start with something small." He sat down next to her. It felt strange for him. He was used to giving instructions, not receiving them. But for once, he allowed himself to be the student. She pressed a single note, letting it ring in the quiet room. "This is C," she explained. "This is where most things begin." He tried pressing it too, but his finger touched the key awkwardly, and the note sounded sharper, almost clumsy. She didn't laugh. She didn't comment. She simply nodded. "We all start like this," she said, encouraging him. Her calm tone eased him a little, and he tried again. The note came out cleaner this time. Not perfect, but definitely better. She taught him a few more basic notes and then asked him to try a simple pattern. It took him several attempts, and each time he got frustrated. But she stayed patient. "Don't rush," she said gently. "Music doesn't follow speed. It follows feeling." Her words surprised him. He wasn't used to working with feelings. His business world ran on speed, pressure, and deadlines. But here he was, being told to slow down, breathe, and feel something. As he tried again, she watched carefully, guiding his fingers when needed. Their hands were close, but not in a romantic way, more like two people building a quiet understanding. He played the simple pattern, imperfect but real, and she nodded approvingly. "That's it," she said. "You're getting it." Something warmed in his chest at that. He never realized how much a small compliment could mean when you were learning something new. After a few minutes he looked at her with curiosity. "How long did it take you to learn?" he asked. She took a few seconds before answering. "Years," she said. "But I didn't learn for show. I learned because it made me feel alive." He listened carefully. There was something about her tone, not loud, not dramatic, just honest. And honesty had a strange power. It made him reconsider his own life choices. He had spent years chasing numbers, deals, and status. Yet here was someone who found joy in something simple and meaningful. "Why didn't you continue?" he asked quietly. Her eyes softened with memory. "My family needed me. My father fell sick. My siblings needed support. Music didn't pay enough. So I chose responsibility." He didn't reply. He couldn't. He never had to give up something he loved. He never had to sacrifice dreams for survival. And hearing her story made him see her in a completely different light. After a while, she stood up. "I should finish cleaning," she said. But he stopped her gently. "You can finish later," he said. "Please, play something again, if you want." She looked at him carefully, trying to read his expression. He wasn't mocking her this time. He wasn't challenging her. He looked sincere, almost vulnerable, so she agreed. She sat down and placed her fingers on the keys, with the natural grace of someone who belonged there. The room went quiet. Even the air felt still. When she played, it wasn't the same as the night she first surprised him. This time, the tune was softer, slower, almost like rain falling gently on a window. It wasn't meant to impress. It wasn't meant to prove him wrong. It was just music, pure and peaceful. The businessman closed his eyes for a moment. He didn't plan to, but the sound pushed him to. The gentle melody touched a part of his heart he had ignored for years. He felt something he couldn't describe, something warm, something gentle, something strangely comforting. When she finished, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was soothing. He opened his eyes slowly. "You can't call that just for fun," he said quietly. "That was something else." She looked down, shyly brushing her fingers over the keys. "It's nothing special," she whispered. "It is," he insisted. "You just don't see it because you lived with it. But for someone like me, it feels special." She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. Over the next few days, a small routine began forming between them. She would arrive and start her chores, but at some point, he would quietly walk to the piano and sit there, waiting. She would glance at him, smile softly, and join him. She taught him more notes, more small patterns, and gradually built them into something that almost sounded like a tiny melody. He wasn't good at it, not yet, but he tried. And for the first time in a long time, trying felt good to him. One day, while she was teaching him a slightly longer pattern, he stopped and looked at her with a serious expression. You should not be working as a housekeeper, he said honestly. Your talent is wasted. She raised her hand gently. This job helped my family, she replied. Talent doesn't always pay bills. Maybe not before, he said, but it can now. She shook her head, smiling. I'm too old to start something new. He laughed lightly. You're not old, and even if you were, who decides when someone is allowed to start? You. She didn't answer. His words stayed in the air, like a truth she had avoided for years. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You could teach, he suggested. Children, adults, anyone who wants to learn. Her eyes widened slightly. She hadn't thought about that. Teaching had never crossed her mind. She had only seen music as something personal, something for her own heart, not something to share professionally. I don't know if I can, she said softly. You already are, he replied, pointing to himself. That made her smile a little. The idea wasn't impossible. It wasn't grand or unrealistic. It was simple, and maybe simple was enough. The following week, something unexpected happened. The businessman had a few visitors, business partners, who often came to discuss work. They entered the house in loud voices and confident steps, as businessmen often do. But when they walked into the living room, they stopped at the sight of the piano and the housekeeper. She moved aside politely, not wanting to interrupt the meeting. But one of the men joked, "Does she play too?" The businessman shot him a look that surprised everyone. "She plays better than all of us," he said sharply. "Much better." The housekeeper looked down, embarrassed but touched. The businessman's tone wasn't mocking or playful. It carried undeniable respect. Later that evening, after the visitors left, she approached him while he was closing his laptop. "You didn't have to say that," she said softly. "I meant it," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, and something changed between them, something deeper than just teacher and student, or employer and employee. It wasn't romance. It wasn't dramatic. It was something more meaningful, a kind of mutual understanding, a kind of respect. On her last day of the week, she stood by the door, ready to leave. She hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, about teaching." He looked up immediately, and, "I want to try," she said. "Maybe it's time." His smile appeared slowly but naturally. "Good," he said. "You deserve that." She nodded and stepped outside. As the door closed behind her, the businessman sat by the piano again, running his fingers across the keys. He wasn't a good player yet, but he felt connected to the instrument and to the person who brought that connection back to life. He pressed a single note. It echoed softly through the room, simple, quiet, but full of meaning. And in that moment, he realized something important. The tune she played that first night didn't just change the atmosphere. It changed him.